Since we won the right to work, women have been told that we can have it all. I think what we've learned over time, though, is that this isn't really the case. With studies showing that working women still take on the majority of domestic labor alone, there is a long way to go before most women feel the same freedom that men typically do to balance family and work. This week's guest shares her story of balancing not only her work and home lives, which includes parenting a neurodivergent child, but the complexities of having bipolar disorder, all within the context of the pandemic. Please be advised that this episode of Forks contains discussions around sensitive topics, including suicide and sexual abuse, that may be triggering for some listeners. The experiences shared by Mookie are deeply personal and may not reflect the experiences of others dealing with similar challenges. This content is intended for informational and storytelling purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health issues or trauma, we encourage you to seek professional help. In cases of crisis, please contact a local mental health support line or suicide prevention hotline.
I'm Alexis Hood.
And I'm Amie Plurd.
And you're listening to Forks.
I'm so excited to have Mookie here today with us. We've been friends for over 30 years. We've been through a lot of ups and downs together. And over the last several years, our weekly walks have become a cherished ritual, almost like therapy sessions, where we share some of our deepest thoughts and concerns. Mookie's resilience is truly remarkable. She's not only navigated her own journey with bipolar disorder, but she's also raising a neurodivergent child with immense courage, empathy, and dedication. Her insights and strength have been a profound inspiration to me, and I'm so excited to have her today sharing her wisdom, her insights with our listeners. So Mookie, thanks so much for being part of our podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is really exciting.
Well, we haven't known each other for 30 years, but I am really grateful that you've agreed to share your story with us. And, I share some of the same kind of challenges. And, what you've shared with me has really given me a lot to think about in terms of my own journey around mental health and navigating raising a child who's two children actually who are neurodivergent. So thank you for joining today.
Happy to be here.
Okay. So we're just going to dive in. Can you take us to your fork, the pivotal moment where everything changed?
Yeah. So it was a week back in 2022. I had gone back to work after being away for about 8 years with my son, and I was starting from scratch again. It was the same position, but being away for 8 years, it's like you're starting fresh because you have to jump into the same work and you haven't been in that mindset for a while. And so I was putting a lot of effort and a lot of my energy, a lot of my time into doing well at this job and just almost wanting to prove myself. And this one week, my husband was away for work for the first time since the start of the pandemic. And so it was just my son and I. And I thought that I was doing all right with the whole going to work and parenting thing. But this one week, the kids were home from school. I think shortly after Easter, and they were doing virtual school. So my son was home with me during the day with the laptop and his desk, and I was at the table with my laptop just a few feet away. And I noticed that he wasn't really engaged. He was looking to the side, and he was just not engaged in the classroom kind of stuff. And I was kind of getting impatient with him because his teacher was right there. And so when I had a break in my day, I went over to him and wanted to help him with his work, to kind of keep him on track, that kind of thing. And I didn't have a lot of patience that day, in that moment with him, he had to do this assignment, and I was looking at it and I couldn't figure out why, like, he couldn't just do it. He couldn't just do the work. And I don't know if it was like the kind of like the stress of my day and just the stress of just being back at work, or and like having to balance everything, or my husband being away. But like in that moment, I was like really drilling into him, like, why, Zach, why can't you do this? Like, it's that, just do it. And he was looking at me and he was like, he didn't have really any, he was really withdrawn. And I don't know why I did this, because like before then I was, when we found out that he had ADHD, like I knew that I had to parent a different way. I was kind of taught how to like emotion coach and like co-regulate in order to help him with his emotions. And in that moment, I like lost it, and I just kept drilling into him, and he was crying, and I I don't know why, but I didn't stop. It was like I was taking it out at him in a way, and he he did not react very well at all. Like, he was very silent and very withdrawn, but he did something that told me that he certainly was not okay. I could tell quite clearly that he really wanted to harm himself. He really wanted to hurt himself because of the internalization of my anger towards him. He like turned it inwards, and just he wanted to harm himself because of that. And it was really shocking to me. I it was I it was I can't even describe the feeling I felt in the moment. I felt like I felt very alone as well, because my husband wasn't there. And I I was able to like kind of pull myself out of that like drilling into him, and I was able to like kind of go back to my training, so to speak, and go into that, like, what does he need? What does he need? But in a way, it was almost like a cover, because I was doing all the things, but inside I wasn't really regulated myself. And co-regulation is all about the parent being regulated, and then having that as like the centering force for the child in a way, right? So like for the rest of the week, I was able to reconnect with Zach, which was great. Reconnect and repair whatever I had damaged in that moment. But I was still feeling a lot of resentment, mainly toward my husband at that time, because he was not there. And prior to that week, our whole journey trying to figure out how to support Zach, like, and with like the social worker and the therapist, like really, really trying to get us to do this emotion coaching thing, and me saying to my husband, like, okay, this is what we got to do. This is what they're telling us to do. And these are the steps. This is the protocol. All we have to do is do it. And the way I was kind of almost shoving it down like Neil's throat, like, this is the only way. He didn't agree that it was the only way. He had a different approach, and he felt like he could never really say it to me. And so whenever I told him about the approach and how we have to do it, he would always withdraw. And so leading up to that week, in our parenting, in our partnership as well, like I always felt that whenever I brought something up about our son, that my husband would withdraw and almost like be absent, even though he was right there. Like, he would withdraw and he would check out, basically. He would check out. And so after that incident with my son, even though there was repair in the next few days, I, like, that resentment. I remember Neil calling. I forget where he was, but he called, and he asked if like how we were, and I told him what happened. He was like, "Are you okay?" And I started drilling into him, saying that I was so mad. I was so I had so much rage because I felt like I was doing it all by myself. I was not composed at all. I got off the phone with him and I wrote him this like long text, basically being able like trying to articulate my words to him or my thoughts, basically saying, even when you're present, you're absent. And it was the first time I actually like spoke those words that I actually felt. And it rocked our connection, or like it really, it pushed Neil over the edge actually. It he was away and he was so triggered by that because he felt like me kind of drilling into him, and like he felt like I was blaming him, and he was also holding his own kind of resentment towards me for trying to push down this right way of parenting onto him that he never expressed to me. So like that week, like the thing that happened with our son, and then like what happened between he and I when I was trying to communicate to him like all the stuff that I was holding for many, many months before that, that week just broke us. Really, that week broke our family.
I have to tell you, this story feels very familiar to me.
Does it?
Absolutely. And I am so impressed with even your knowledge of co-regulation and all of that. When I had my first child, I was 23 and ill-equipped, frankly, to even have a child, let alone a child who would go on to be diagnosed with autism and ADHD and who had major emotional dysregulation issues of their own. And when I look back, the biggest regrets that I have are not being able to do that for them. And, you know, I'm so much better at that now. And there was 10 years between my children. And so, unfortunately for my first child, my second child got a much better version of myself, as did my husband. And what you describe about, you know, my husband also would kind of shut down. And because what you describe is exactly what I was doing as well. Very much, okay, I've done all the research. I have all of the information and the stats and the facts. I am now the authority on all the things. And I'm going to also grade your performance on this. And absolutely, I mean, it creates, and, you know, there's a lot of stats that point to marriages breaking up, not because they have neurodivergent kids, but just there are so many, you know, when you think about just the pressures that are on parents of neurotypical kids, just everybody's everyday lives. And then you layer on, you know, we're not psychologists. And I mean, there are much better supports now, but not enough, and certainly weren't when I was 23 and a parent. So anyway, everything you just described just like is so familiar to me. So I just want to say, I hope you've forgiven yourself, because I think this is the story of many parents who are in your shoes. And also, I think the pandemic was such a big factor in ratcheting up the stress. And
I agree.
you know, I think what your son was facing wasn't just you trying to drill into him. It was also, you know, when I look at my kids who were sitting there on their laptops, like I remember going in the other room and screaming into a pillow the last time they said, we're going to be staying home again. Like, what a nightmare.
Yeah.
For everybody. So, I mean, no wonder you were pushed, you know, to the brink.
I did not expect them to go back to virtual that year at all. It was not.
It was a nightmare. I mean, you know, mental health issues amongst all of us, but especially kids, like just hearing from so many educators, just the pressures and the mental health issues that they've seen in younger and younger children.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. So anyways, all that to say, I hope that you've managed to kind of find some forgiveness and compassion for yourself.
I have. It's been a long journey though. And like, I kind of knew in that moment that like, even though I knew textbook how to co-regulate, I was asking myself, why is it still hard for me? Like, I know the steps. Why is it still hard for me to do it? And that really prompted me to look inside and kind of figure that out, because why am I so triggered by his dysregulation? It was,
Because it's hard
it's hard.
and it's exhausting.
Yes.
When your child is having extreme emotional dysregulation or whatever,
Yep.
they're dealing with these issues, we're not prepared for it and we're tired. We have our own pressures. And no, I know exactly what you mean. It is hard. And not enough people talk about how hard it is to raise these amazing kids who have these extra challenges.
It is
Yeah.
unbelievably hard.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Yeah. And there's so much judgment. I don't know if you've experienced or felt that as well. I certainly felt that as a younger parent. I already felt the need to be, proving people wrong who might have thought I was too young to have a child. But also now I have to be great at co-regulating, great at all these things. Like,
I felt like I was almost in between two worlds, like kind of knowing how to do it, like, and trying to show that I knew how to do it, but also being kind of distanced from my family, because they would always say, "Oh, there was nothing wrong with him." And when I tried to talk to them about the new way of parenting that I've learned, it's like they couldn't understand. So I felt like I was between two worlds.
yeah, there's that generational divide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened after that week? Where did you go from there?
So Neil came home.
Were you nervous?
I honestly, in previous arguments, I would be nervous. This time, it was just like I did not have any regret or thought about the consequence, because it was like this. I was at a point where I had to say what I said, and there was no apology, no taking it back, because it was just that was my truth in that moment. And so I wasn't nervous. I was just like, whatever is going to be is going to be. I was ready for our marriage to be over. I was ready for him to
Wow.
yeah, like he came home and he was a totally different, his whole persona, like the way he carried himself was just, he was not the same person. And we didn't actually talk beyond very reserved, like pleasantries, like our body language, the space that we took up. We were not the same people. And it led to us actually having after some time, having a very frank conversation about the state of our marriage, because really parenting Zach really took a toll on us, and like the trust that we had between each other, that was gone. He didn't trust me, I didn't trust him. It was a mess. But we both decided that it would be good for us to see a couples counselor, and that's what we did. That's what we did. We found somebody, and it didn't work at first because the person automatically assumed that Neil had all these issues, and she automatically said that it was because of his upbringing or whatever, and he knew it wasn't that. So what we really needed was a therapist, and we found one who was neurodivergent, because we knew that with Zach being diagnosed with ADHD, that Neil had ADHD as well. So, yeah, we went down that path, and it helped to bring us back together. It took a while, but it helped. And for Zach, I reached out to the occupational therapist that he was seeing at the time. I remember one of our sessions, I was just like, waterworks, letting her know what happened. And she was so empathetic, and she reassured me that that I was not to blame myself, and she was so supportive when it came to Zach. So that was amazing. But for me, God, this is the part that was that was hard, because I knew that something had to give. I was such a wreck that week. Like something had to give. I didn't have enough of me to go around for my job, for my partner, for my son. And I was a mess because I felt like I had to choose. And like, how do you choose between like those three things? Like, it's like, my job meant so much to me. Like the 8 years that I was home with Zach, I was plotting the entire time, like my return. And it like I never ever stopped thinking about like being back at work, not just at work, but that specific job, because it was so much a part of who I was. And I felt like becoming a mother kind of pulled me away from that piece of myself that I really identified with, and I needed to go back there. So like being there in that moment and thinking like, I fought to get back here. I really fought to get back here, and now I have to choose. I have to choose, like, is it going to be my job? Is it going to be my son? Is it going to be my partner? It was horrible, and I was a complete mess. I remember talking to my manager at the time, again crying, bawling my eyes out, like just feeling the pressure of work and of like stuff with Zach. And I didn't tell her about Neil, but like that as well. And I remember telling her like, I either have to, I need a break, or I need to quit. And my manager, when I met her through my interview, like I remember really selling her on my mission to come back to work, to like my comeback story, right? And so she was a real advocate for me to like come back to work, because she could really empathize with that personal need. And I felt like I was letting her down in a way, telling her that like I I can't do this. It was really hard. It was really, really hard. But she convinced me. She was like, but you have options. You have benefits. So don't quit, because if you quit, you're going to lose it all. So just use your benefits. And so I did the practical thing and took some time off. I got a medical note, and it was totally fine. And so I was on short-term leave, and I had to ask myself, okay, what do I do now? Because my history of bipolar disorder, like anytime I've ever needed a break, it was because I kind of spiraled into psychosis or into a state where like I was in crisis. So I at this point I wasn't quite in crisis, but I was also not okay. So it was like, okay, what do I do now? And I thought, you know what? I've been an inpatient and I've been an outpatient. I am technically not in the hospital right now. So what do? I do what I would do if I was an outpatient. And so I went online and started looking for what programs or therapies are available. And I found this mindfulness based cognitive therapy program, and I was like, okay, I'm doing that. And like I signed up for some peer support groups. Like I just created a whole outpatient program for myself. And that was basically what I did for the next probably a couple months. And I had to do it. Frick, I had to do it. I hated waking up in the morning. Like I had so much dread waking up in the morning. But like being on leave, like I felt like I could almost wake up and just breathe, like just have that feeling of lightness, and being able to just use the little energy that I had for my family. It really healed our family. It took a lot, but those next few months were I don't even know the word. A reset. Yeah. a real reset, because like when I was talking about Neil and we couldn't go back, like the honesty that came from our conversations in those weeks, like we were talking like as if we were not even in a marriage, as if we were just two people talking to each other, as if there were no consequences. And a lot of the things that were said were really hurtful, not because we were trying to hurt the other person, because of how truthful they were. Um, but I don't regret it. Like um, at the time I did, I was so embarrassed, honestly, by how I left, like how I kind of left work to go on leave. And when I decided that it was the right decision for my family to resign officially, it wasn't an it wasn't an easy decision to make. I remember my manager had moved on, and so it was her manager that was working with me while I was on leave. And I remember she called me, and again I broke down. I broke down because it was just like I knew I had to say goodbye to this job. And
That was hard. Yeah.
Take your time.
Yeah. That would be so hard because you fought so hard to get back into that job, and so much of your identity is tied into it. And yeah.
yeah, and it was really hard to say goodbye. But she was very understanding. She was very, very understanding. She shared that she had a neurodivergent child herself, so she understood the struggle. And I left with an open door. They told me that I'm more than welcome to come back if I ever wanted to. But it was hard.
Yeah.
Hard to leave.
And I'm wondering too, how have you felt, throughout your working career in terms of the support you get? Have you experienced, that stigma that often comes with discussing a mental illness or having to take time, to manage your mental health?
I feel like I've experienced like both ends of the support spectrum at work. I remember like one of my earliest managers when I started working in the corporate environment. Again, in the beginning, I was working so hard. I was trying to prove myself, and I burned myself out, and I needed a break. And so I called in sick, and my manager did not believe me. He accused me of faking it, which to me was just like, it was just so, it like, it was like a blow. I couldn't breathe. It was like someone punched me, and I lost the wind out of me was knocked out, and I couldn't believe it really. And I felt like there was nothing that I could do. I remember talking to my doctor and saying, this is what happened. And like, my boss doesn't believe me. My doctor said, don't worry about your manager. He has no right to accuse you of saying that you're faking it, because you're not. I'm going to write you a doctor's note, and you take the time that you need, because yeah, this doctor of mine was like an amazing advocate for me. And I didn't know that I actually had choices, where I actually had rights at that time. And it kind of just blew me away. But yeah, that was one kind of example of one side of the spectrum of support. I remember like,
Had you disclosed your diagnosis to this manager? Like, did he know?
I can't remember. I can't remember if he in particular did or didn't.
I mean, not that it should matter, and somebody shouldn't have to disclose the exact nature of their health issues. I was just curious if you had told him any even.
I like, honestly, I don't remember. I'm gonna say no, that he didn't know, because with my next manager, I felt like I had to tell her. I felt like I really had to tell her. And that's the other example of like support on the other spectrum, because when I told her, because at this time, Neil and I were trying to plan our wedding, which is a very, very stressful thing for anybody. But for someone who who struggles with her mental health, it was even more so for me. And I had to take a break, and I let her know, and I told her why, and I disclosed my diagnosis to her, and she was so supportive. She was so supportive. She was like, Mookie, don't worry about it. Like, you focus on you. The work is always going to be here. You go and take care of yourself. And it was just so comforting for her to hear that from her. And the reason why she was able to kind of be supportive of me in that way is because she had her own experience with mental health and mental illness, because like her daughter struggled with bipolar disorder herself. So she came from a place of understanding because it was coming from her own lived experience. So like when you ask like what my experience was like at work with disclosing, I mean, it's hit or miss, I feel.
It feels like such a risk, and sometimes the payoff can be great,
Well, the thing
and
is,
sometimes it can be
yeah,
disastrous.
when I left the job that I was talking, the one that I went back to after all those years, and when I was talking to my manager, I was crying to her and like saying to her like I need either a break or I need to quit. I felt just in the way that she was responding, that I felt that she was feeling the weight of what that meant if I went on leave. Like on one note, she was saying like, use your benefits, like take the time you need. But on the other hand, it was just like she knew that if I left, then the work would fall on her, right? And
It's complicated.
it's complicated.
Absolutely. And I know we've talked about this before, but there needs to be, I think, more of a framework of support in terms of when someone takes a leave, how does that work get distributed, or how does that work then get outsourced, or do you bring a contract person in? But yeah, oftentimes it lands on that manager, which puts them in a really difficult position when they're having these conversations sometimes, right?
Yeah, it's because they want to support you, but if there's no policy to actually support you, then it's just it falls on them, and it also makes the person with the mental illness or the diagnosis feel like if they disclose, then they're also like becoming a liability in a way, right? And it's a very complicated feeling to be in that position.
You feel responsible for, and that shouldn't be the case.
Exactly.
You don't need that additional layer, but there it is. And so if, managers aren't supported and trained and to how they navigate these situations, then, it takes a toll.
It does. It really does. It's like, and like I know in the corporate environment I was a part of, there were many campaigns for like youth mental health and like, Belle, let's talk. It's like, okay, let's talk, but what are we actually going to do?
Yeah. Where's the action?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did stepping away from your career impact your mental health in the short term and the long term? Like, what were the outcomes?
So, in the short term, it was absolutely the best thing for my family. In the long term, it's absolutely the best thing for my family. I was talking a little bit earlier about just noting that I knew the steps for co-regulation, but like, why wasn't I able to do it? Because like, why was I so triggered by my son?
Because you're human.
Like, because I'm human.
Yeah.
But I needed to know what was preventing me, and that look inside prompted me to be more honest with the therapist that I was working with at the time, because I had this really deeply rooted sense of not feeling like I'm enough. And I didn't really know at the time that was a contributing factor to why my son triggered me so intensely, because his reactions reminded me of my own reactions, and the way my parents silenced me in a way, made me feel like I wasn't allowed to have those feelings. And so I saw Zach and thinking that like he's not allowed to have those feelings either because I wasn't. I had to take a step inside and see what was there. And what was there was a lot of trauma, a lot of trauma that I had not really talked a lot about to anybody in length. Like, I've been managing my bipolar disorder since my early 20s, late teens, early 20s. So very, very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost as long as you and I have known each other, Ames, right? And I've done lots of therapies, and the ones that I did early on didn't really address anything having to do with trauma at all. And so I just felt like I needed to tell somebody all the things that I felt like I had done wrong, and that that had marked me in a way that made my parents feel like there was something wrong with me.
So now that you have gone through that therapy over the last couple years, where are you now with that feeling of, which I think is really common, not being enough?
I felt like me being enough was a direct result of the things that I chose to do. And in therapy, I came to realize and understand and have self-compassion for myself that the things that I chose to do, I did because of the things that were normalized to me, but also because I was sick. I was psychotic many times because I didn't take my medication, because I thought the medication was awful, because my parents felt sorry for me because I was taking medication, because of my own stigma, really, that I feel that I inherited from them in a way, because they thought that that having any type of mental illness was shameful, and it was not something to talk about, and certainly not something to disclose to anybody about. And I felt like I had to kind of, that I was holding a dirty secret in a way, and that I was just shameful for the things that I did when I was sick, the things that I did when I was younger. But like I came to understand that me feeling like I wasn't enough was like this repetitive story I was telling myself because of the message that I was receiving from the people who I felt needed to validate me, my parents, my family. Um, when it comes to my job, when it came to my job, my feeling of not being enough stems from the lack of validation I got from my parents, but also why my job was so important to me. Early on in my diagnosis, like in my early 20s, I was not taking my medication because I thought that medication was not a good thing. I didn't want my parents to feel sorry for me for taking medication. So I didn't take my medication, and I was sick. I was in a psychotic state, and I was not getting better, obviously. And my parents had a restaurant at the time, and they were working really, really long hours, and they had to go to work, and they were fed up that I was not getting better, and that I was not just that I wasn't getting better, that I wasn't able to help them. I knew they were reaching the end of their rope.
Help them with the restaurant, you mean?
Yeah, with the restaurant.
Right.
Um, my parents had to leave to go, and I was in my own world. I was in my own psychotic state world, and I was kind of oblivious to all of this until my mom, I remember she was standing by the door. She was about to go outside, and she turned around. I was saying something to her, like almost innocently, and she turned around and she looked at me with like rage-filled eyes and said to me, not even said to me, like the way like I was drilling into Zach, I felt like she was drilling into me in that moment in the past. And she was saying that if I didn't get better, then she would put me into an institution. And she said it with so much conviction and so much like rage, as if like that was the only solution for my predicament at the time. And I remember just feeling like, so I feel like I was being thrown away. And my parents left to go to the restaurant. And when I saw their car leave the driveway, I got into, okay, now I need to start planning. So what I felt in that moment was immense burden. I felt like I was stuck. I was stuck. I was stuck with my parents who didn't think that I was anything at that point. Like at this point, I dropped out of university. I wasn't able to do anything. I couldn't think. I couldn't, my racing thoughts. It was not a good situation. So I thought that my only option was to end my life. So I tried to slit my wrist, and I remember like holding the knife to my wrist and like telling myself, okay, you gotta do this, because when they come back, they're gonna lock you away because you're not getting better. So you gotta do this. And I was able to cut a little bit, but I just couldn't bring myself to go deeper. So I was like, okay, there's gotta be another way. So I raided the alcohol cabinet and found a bottle of ibuprofen, downed it all. I was like, okay, this is it. I don't know what happened. Apparently I passed out, hit my head on like the coffee table. I still have a huge scar here from that. And my parents came home, and I just remember like vaguely that my mom was in a panic. She called my cousin and said that I was passed out. They found the empty bottle of ibuprofen and the whiskey. They drove me to the hospital, and I was admitted. And this is probably the second time I was admitted, but I was admitted for quite some time. And while I was in the hospital, the nurses were trying to understand why I wanted to kill myself. I didn't really have the answers or like the reasons. The only thing that I could tell them was that because my parents were disappointed in me, because they didn't believe that I would amount to anything. And as a child, I was like their golden child. As a child, I was assessed as being gifted, and I was in a special program, and they put a lot of their hopes and their dreams in me. So when I couldn't finish university, they pretty much gave up on me. And so I was just telling the nurses, my parents are disappointed in me because I can't go to school. And so the nurses took it upon themselves to get me back to school because to them, that was the problem. That was like, if I went back to school, I finished, and like everybody, like happily ever after. So like I ended up going back to school, but I had to like really think about what I wanted to study, because in university I was studying cultural anthropology, and I don't think that I didn't believe that I could support myself as a cultural anthropologist. So I was being really pragmatic, and I chose to study systems analysis and design because I knew that it was a job where I could support myself, because I knew that I couldn't depend on my family to support me, because their support would be institutionalizing me. So it was like, it was my ticket out. Like, this was like, I have to do this. I have to study this. I have to finish. I have to do well, and I have to get a job in this field, because that is the only way I'm going to avoid institutionalization. So graduating, getting this job in this corporate environment, it was like it's like I saved myself from the other option. And I realized that there was part of the reason why it was so tied to my identity is that it was how I it was how I saved myself. And letting go of that was like letting go of my security in a way,
Mm.
because without that job, without that paycheck, if I were to get sick, what would happen to me? I would go into the care of my parents, and they would institutionalize me, and that was not an option. So I had to work through all of that, all of that. And even when I worked through all of that, I realized that that wasn't it. That wasn't all of it. There was still so much stuff underneath, so much trauma. Like, one of the first things that I shared with my therapist while I was on short-term leave was like a really, um, a really shameful moment that I partook in, that my father witnessed, and that I that that I was holding for a very long time, and that I felt was the reason why I was not good enough. One, I wouldn't say the reason, but like probably one of the biggest reasons why I was not good enough, that I had never, ever, ever, ever told anybody, nobody, for like 20 years. And when I was on short-term leave, I just said it to my therapist, and I was so afraid that I was going to spiral into another psychotic episode, or I was going to get sick, because that was my fear, that if I talked about this or if I shared this, then I would get sick. Like, my parents made me feel like if the world knew what they would do to you, because we know, and if we weren't your parents, it no, like, no one will love you as much as just your parents. We, as your parents, love you even though you did this, and nobody else will. So you can't tell anybody. That is what I felt. But going through this process with my therapist, I came to learn that that shameful act was a result of all the stuff that it was a sexual act, and it was a result of my early exposure to pornography. My first exposure to pornography was when I was 3 years old. I happened to find magazines that belonged to my uncle, and my mom was the one who was like, she saw me, and I was just like engrossed in all of it. Um, it was, I don't know if it was a result, but like coincidentally, I remember around that period being really, really sick, feeling really sick for a long time. And talking to my therapist, it could have been because my entire system was overwhelmed by the images that I was seeing. But it did something to me in that it opened me up in a way that I shouldn't have been opened up, not that early. And in my childhood, I sought out pornography. And not only did I seek it, but the adults who were responsible for taking care of me were watching it in my presence. And I wondered for a long time, like, why I did what I did. I thought that there was something really wrong with me, but through therapy, I came to understand that what I did is what I thought was normal. And that normalization was a result of what I was exposed to. And saying it out loud was, it showed me that I was still alive and breathing, and my feet were still grounded. The world was still standing, even though I said it to somebody. And that was pivotal. And getting that out of my system, not just out of my system, but forgiving myself for all of that, is really what has brought me to where I am today, because I feel like I've unearthed all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm almost freeing myself from the power of it.
I mean, I've certainly noticed a change in you, like I would say in the last year, just in terms of you seem more at peace.
I know that I'm not a bad person now.
You weren't a bad person then.
No. And you're the opposite of a bad person. You're one of the best people. And I think it's so powerful you sharing your story, because I think there are people who are going to relate to you and, the struggles that you've encountered, and they're going to be inspired by how you've worked through those struggles.
There are many people who've been through similar things. And yeah, I think hearing this story, thank you for allowing us to hear that story.
And I want to ask, because we talked about this on one of our walks, on one of our friend therapy sessions. You're sharing something that is so personal about you, about your family. And I just thought what, you shared with me about why you're doing this was wonderful. So why are you sharing?
Because for a long time it had so much power over me, not just it. I had so much self-loathing, and I felt like I was not worthy of anything. So to share it is like releasing it from me. And Alexis, you said that you think that it's going to help others. I mean, if someone else can feel that the things that they've experienced are really not their fault, then, I mean, that's my reason.
Yeah. And I think so often there's so much that we keep secret that we feel shame about. They're not shameful things. And those secrets can eat you inside. And then, I'm always thinking about how I manage that with my kids as well, about not feeling shameful or not feeling like something has to be a secret.
Yeah. Like through my therapy, like I've done so much reparenting work that like I have so much more empathy for that little girl at all those different ages and all those moments where she was just so overwhelmed and where she didn't feel like anybody was actually looking out for her, right? There was like, I know that the adults that were responsible for taking care of me, I know that they didn't intend to hurt me or harm me through their choice of media, but it really is still neglect, right? And
Absolutely.
it took me a long time to see it for what it is.
This was the fault of the adults in those situations, not the child.
Yeah.
And it's that forgiveness. We talked about that in our last episode, just about the importance of forgiveness. And I don't know about you, but I do find it easier to forgive others than myself. I don't know why that is.
I don't know why that is.
Yeah, I don't know if you resonate, if that resonates with you. Yeah,
I think it's because we have more empathy for others. Like, why are we so brutally hurtful to ourselves? I don't know.
Why aren't we more compassionate to ourselves?
It's a $1 million question.
Yeah.
well, maybe we can start today.
Yeah.
So do you feel more at peace today? Do you feel...
I do. I feel like I have certainly healed from all of that grief. There was so much grief that I experienced in those months, like after sharing that with my therapist, and honestly the 2 years that followed. It was just so much grief that I worked through, and I feel like I'm at peace. I'm a different person. Like I am the adult, the parent that all my younger selves needed. And I feel like having a neurodivergent son has helped me to be more empathetic with the parts of me that needed that support, because I'm giving it to him. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
You get to be the parent to him that...
That I never had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's huge. So looking back and thinking about that child, that person that you were at all of these different stages, or thinking about somebody who might be in one of those positions today, what advice might you give any of those individuals who are going through what you've been through?
I have to put like a little disclaimer here, because I know that the months that I was on leave and the couple years that followed that I really was in intensive therapy, that I was able to devote time to that because of, I feel privileged to have been able to do so. Not everybody is able to pause life, so to speak, so that they can focus on healing. And I have been able to. Though, if someone out there is experiencing a fraction or even more than what I experienced, I would say, like, there is so much help now. There are so many different supports. And even if there isn't a lot of resources to like invest into therapy, there's like peer support, there's like mindfulness, there's so many things. And I feel like it's just so worth it to try to heal as best as you can, because it's like investing in yourself in a way.
It's taking that first step.
Yeah.
Is the hardest.
Yeah. Like I remember someone saying that, like, everything you feel is valid, but you behaving in a way because of how you feel, like, for example, you feel hurt and you hurt somebody else because you feel hurt, that's not acceptable. Like, broken people break others. But if you're broken, you have a responsibility to heal yourself, because it's moving through the world with pain and creating pain for others is not acceptable.
Thank you so much, Mookie, for sharing all that and for
It's
just being
amazing.
so vulnerable. And yeah,
Yeah, I have no words. Like it was just so powerful.
we're going to
What
hug
you
and
shared.
cry right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me here, guys.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you found inspiration here, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts and leaving us a 5-star review. It really helps us. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn.